October 14th, 1944. A quiet German village. A black Mercedes gliding toward a wounded war hero's home like a funeral shadow. Inside the car, 2 SS generals. One carried a tiny glass vial. Clear, liquid, instant death. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had 15 minutes to decide how he would die. Not for betrayal, not for planting bombs, not for helping the enemy. His crime was something far more dangerous in a dictatorship: telling the truth. October 14th, 1944. Heringking, Germany. A black Mercedes rolled toward Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's villa, like a shadow warning of something terrible. When the doors opened, 2 SS generals stepped out, one of them carrying a small glass vial hidden in his pocket, a vial that could end a life in just a few breaths. In the cold autumn air, the Desert Fox had only 15 minutes to choose how he would die. But what had truly brought RML to this moment? He never planted a bomb, never worked with enemy agents, and never plotted to sabotage the German army. His crime was not only speaking honestly about the military situation. After the July 20th plot, several officers mentioned his name during interrogation, which made him look suspicious in a regime that treated any sign of disagreement as treason. Rommel never conspired to kill Hitler, but his honesty cut just as deeply as any weapon, and for the collapsing regime, it was unforgivable. This is the tragic story of how a general's loyalty to truth turned him into an enemy of a dictator, and how simply admitting defeat became a death sentence. The relationship between Erwin Rommel and Adolf Hitler began in mutual respect. Through the 1930s, Rommel was a professional soldier who had served with distinction in the First World War, earning Germany's highest honors for combat bravery. After that war stripped Germany's military down to a skeleton force, RML chose to stay in the army, first as an instructor, then rising through the ranks as Hitler consolidated power. By the mid-1930s, RML had been selected to serve as Hitler's military escort at the annual Nuremberg rally. Those massive Nazi spectacles where hundreds of thousands gathered. The assignment brought RML into Hitler's inner circle. His later promotions from lieutenant colonel to colonel and then to major general came from his combat record, and they happened while Hitler was building his new military system, which naturally brought RML deeper into the regime. My father had at first no problems with Hitler. Manfred RML would later recall about those early years when his father's career was rising and Germany seemed to be recovering its pride. September 1st, 1939, changed everything. German forces invaded Poland, launching the Second World War. In 1940, Hitler gave Rommel command of the 7th Panzer Division. RML led his tanks through France with such speed and aggression that the division earned the nickname Ghost Division, appearing everywhere, striking hard, driving to the English Channel in a campaign that stunned Europe. In February 1941, RML was promoted to Lieutenant General. Then came the assignment that would make him legendary, command of the Afrika Korps in North Africa. Before departing, RML met with Hitler at the Führer's headquarters. The meeting was cordial and professional. Both men had been combat soldiers in the First World War, creating a bond that seemed unbreakable. Rommel's relationship with Hitler, before Rommel was sent to North Africa with the Afrika Korps, was very much that of a superior subordinate. Historians would note in the early years, Rommel accepted Hitler's authority without question. But after 1942, he began to challenge orders that no longer made sense, and the distance between them slowly widened. At home in Hurlington, young Manfred watched his father prepare for war, wondering if he would see him again. Erwin Rommel never hesitated to talk with his son, sharing thoughts about duty and offering fatherly advice before heading into danger. Rommel became a favorite of Hitler's since the very beginning. Those close to both men observed, the Führer trusted this general who understood combat firsthand, who led from the front rather than pushing pins on maps. In early 1941, as RML headed south toward African deserts, the future seemed bright. Germany was winning, Hitler's vision seemed vindicated, and Erwin RML was about to become one of the war's most celebrated commanders. Real doubts would appear only a few years later when RML saw Hitler interfere more and more with battlefield decisions and give orders that no longer matched reality. The North African sun beat down as Rommel stood in his command tank's turret, binoculars scanning for British positions. This was his leadership style at the front, where he could see the battlefield himself, where soldiers could see him sharing their danger. It was February 1941, and the Afrika Korps was about to teach the British hard lessons about German armored warfare. What Rommel allegedly didn't know was that British code breakers had cracked Germany's Enigma encryption system. British code breakers were able to read many German signals, but not in real time, and sometimes the messages came too late to give a clear advantage. German experts had believed Enigma would take years to break. They were wrong. My father never believed it. Manfred would say that such a difficult code could be broken, yet the British advantage proved less decisive than expected. When orders arrived from Berlin that Rommel disliked, he simply ignored them, improvising based on battlefield conditions. Rommel sometimes ignored orders from Berlin, but ultra-intelligence helped the British understand German supply problems and larger operational plans. The mistake is that in wartime, any assumption or presumption that you make about enemy capabilities can turn out to be wrong. Analysts would later note through 1941, Rommel drove British forces from key desert positions. His tactics were aggressive and often successful. He began attack, which brought back Libya in over almost 2 weeks to the German-Italian forces. Official reports noted the Afrika cause was winning and Rommel's reputation soared. In Berlin, Hitler recognized a propaganda opportunity. He promoted Rommel to field marshal and ordered propaganda minister Josef Goebbels to transform this commander into a national hero. Rommel was a handsome man. Those working with Goebbels recalled, it didn't hurt that he was photogenic. Soon every German household knew the Desert Fox's name. Success in North Africa gave Rommel something rare among German generals: operational freedom. The relations of my father to Hitler remained rather good, Manfred remembered. My father didn't come so often to Germany, and then Hitler did not interfere in his tactics because the African War was a very fast-going war. While generals in Russia had to follow orders precisely, Rommel could improvise in Africa. When orders came in from the Nazi general staff and Rommel didn't like them, he ripped them up and did it his way. Observers noted, confidence was something that Rommel never lacked for. Historians would write, the man had quite the ego, but the facts supported that confidence. He believed in leading from the front. Those who served under him remembered. Rommel shared the danger, earning his soldiers fierce loyalty. By late 1942, however, the tide was turning. British forces had regrouped and received massive reinforcements. More significantly, American troops had entered the war, fighting alongside the British in North Africa beginning in early November 1942. Suddenly, Rommel faced enemies with seemingly unlimited resources. Tanks, ammunition, fuel, everything flowed to the Allies in quantities that made German supplies look pitiful. Rommel sent urgent requests to Berlin for reinforcements and supplies. Responses were vague, dismissive, or silent. Hitler was taking a very hands-off approach. Historians observe it was almost as if he didn't care. North Africa was to him a sideshow. Hitler had gambled on quick victory in Russia, and that gamble was failing. North Africa now seemed like a distraction. The superiority of the British was so overwhelming and the strategy was made so carefully and exactly that the Germans had no chance. Assessments concluded. Constant pressure took its toll. Rommel suffered from depression, insomnia, dangerously low blood pressure, and chronic headaches. Then came jaundice. The seemingly invincible commander was breaking down. It really was a case of Rommel running rings around his opposition. British commanders would admit they never really quite got the measure of him, and it wasn't until he was so badly outnumbered in men and material that he could not stop an Allied advance that he was finally compelled to retreat out of North Africa entirely. By spring 1943, the end was approaching. Rommel could see it clearly, but Hitler apparently could not, or would not. The Afrika Korps was being strangled, overwhelmed by forces that grew larger daily. When Rommel tried explaining this reality to Berlin, he met silence or anger. The relationship between the Desert Fox and the Führer was beginning to fracture. Erwin Rommel returned to Germany in early 1943, carrying the weight of defeat and a burden of understanding. Germany was going to lose this war. He went to Hitler's headquarters at Rastenburg on his own initiative, believing the Führer needed to hear truth about North Africa. My father went to see Hitler at Rastenburg on his own initiative, Manfred recounted, and he said, "We have to give up Africa. It's not more possible to do anything good under such circumstances." What followed was reportedly a heated exchange that revealed the crumbling relationship. Hitler demanded, "How many rifles do you have in your army?" Rommel, focused on strategy rather than infantry, replied, "I didn't count them." Hitler's response dripped with sarcasm. "That's a wonderful general who doesn't even know how many rifles he has." According to accounts, Rommel's frustration boiled over. "The best thing is, you come to Africa and show us how to fight Montgomery with a carbine 98. He allegedly shot back, challenging Hitler to try fighting with inadequate weapons and no supplies. Hitler ordered him to leave. Then reportedly the Führer ran after him and they returned together. "We all have shattered nerves." Manfred remembered his father saying, but the relationship was starting to sour. In May 1943, the inevitable occurred. 130,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered in North Africa. The Afrika Korps was finished, the campaign ending in complete defeat. But something more profound was changing Rommel. He was hearing disturbing stories about German-controlled territories. It wasn't until late in 1943 when Rommel began to learn of the excesses committed by not just the SS, but by the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front. Historians would piece together. Whispers reached him about concentration camps, death camps, what Nazis called the final solution. "My father discovered not only a lot of crimes which had been made," Manfred would say, "but also that this will be a tremendous dilemma and it will be not possible to come to a reasonable peace arrangement." The Hitler Rommel had respected was revealing himself as something far darker. The regime wasn't just fighting a war, it was engaged in systematic murder. His whole attitude towards Hitler began to turn not just sour, but arguably hostile. Scholars concluded, in February 1943, far from North Africa, the war's turning point came at Stalingrad. There, over 800,000 Axis soldiers were destroyed in a battle many historians believe marked Germany's inevitable defeat. After Stalingrad, Soviet forces began pushing westward. Both Rommel and Hitler knew what came next. The Allies would invade Western Europe, creating the two-front nightmare that had doomed Germany in the First World War. Later in 1943, months after the defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler appointed Rommel to inspect the defenses of Western Europe, and in early 1944, he received command of Army Group B. It was prestigious, but poisoned. Responsibility for stopping an invasion with resources that didn't exist. When Rommel first inspected the Atlantic Wall in late 1943, he allegedly discovered a sobering reality. Hitler had boasted for years about impregnable coastal defenses supposedly stretching 1,600 meters from Norway to Spain's border. What Rommel found existed more in the Führer's imagination than in concrete and steel. "My father had a rather realistic idea of the Allied tactics and way of fighting," Manfred explained. Having fought Americans and British in North Africa, Rommel understood their capabilities and resources. He moved his headquarters to La Rogue-One, a 12th century chateau overlooking the Seine's north bank, 40 miles closer to France's coast. From here, he would direct the defense. Rommel's strategy was straightforward. Rommel recognized that if the Germans were to stop an invasion in the west, they had to do it at the waterline in the first 24 hours of battle. Analysts noted they could not let the Allied army get ashore in Western Europe. The reasoning was sound. Germany no longer controlled the air. Allied aircraft dominated. Germany's Atlantic Navy was nearly non-existent. Allied ships ruled the seas. The only advantage was defending fixed positions against troops landing on hostile beaches. But that advantage would vanish once the Allies established a beachhead. Not all German commanders agreed. Others, like Field Marshal von Rundstedt, believed in mobile warfare further inland. "My father was not very convincing," Manfred admitted. Obviously, von Rundstedt still believed on the big mobile battle, but Rommel understood what others reportedly didn't want to accept. "My father was also convinced that no mobile battle in the size of 1940 was any more possible," Manfred explained, because the Allied British and Americans were so superior in the air that they would have nailed down the German armor, and it would have been hopeless for them. Rommel set about making Hitler's fictional wall real. He ordered hundreds of thousands of mines laid across beaches, thousands of obstacles constructed to destroy landing craft and impale paratroopers. Rommel hoped to place a very large number of mines, possibly tens of millions, across the entire defense line. But before the invasion, he managed only a few million. which was far less than he had planned. Rommel was like a jolt of electricity when he took over command. Those serving under him recalled, he traveled constantly, inspecting coastlines, sketching obstacle designs, and demanding action. He did a lot of fortifications himself, a lot of initiative, and also imagination. But one crucial question remained. Where would the Allies attack? Logic suggested past Killala, only 19 mil across the English Channel from England. Hitler believed Killala was the target. Rommel initially concurred. Neither knew they were being deceived. The Allies had created Operation Fortitude, one of history's most elaborate military deceptions. In southeastern England, opposite Killala, they built a fake army, inflatable tanks, dummy aircraft, false radio traffic, creating the impression of massive forces preparing to invade Killala. One of the great stories of World War II that is poorly known to this day is Operation Fortitude. Historians would marvel, and the Germans had no mean to find out if this is true or not true. It was in its own way every bit as complex and detailed and required as great a degree of precision as the Overlord landings on Normandy. The French resistance supported the deception effort, but most of the false information that reached German intelligence came from British-controlled double agents who pointed the Germans toward Killala. The activities of the French resistance were carefully coordinated with Fortitude to again create the impression that the landings were going to happen in the Pas-de-Calais. Records showed Hitler became strongly convinced that Killala was the real target of the invasion, and this belief caused him to overlook the danger building in Normandy. Rommel strengthened Killala but also reinforced Normandy, adding Germany's battle-hardened 352nd Infantry Division there. Something about the situation bothered him. My father was absolutely certain that Germany cannot win any war anymore, Manfred remembered. By 1944, Rommel knew the war was lost. He reportedly hoped that by making the invasion costly enough, he might convince Hitler to seek peace before Germany's complete destruction. It was slim hope, but it was all he had. As June 1944 approached, Rommel continued inspections and training, pushing hard because time was running out. June's Channel weather was notoriously rough. Surely the Allies would wait for better conditions. Rommel had done everything possible with impossible circumstances. The Atlantic Wall was real now, deadly and waiting. What happened next would prove both his strategic insight and his inability to change the war's course. Around 7 in the morning, on June 6, 1944, the telephone rang in Rommel's villa in Herlingen with the news that the Allied invasion had begun. The news was clear. The Allies were landing in Normandy. It takes 24 hours. Afterward, we knew what was going on, Manfred recalled. The timing was cruel and ironic. Of all days, the Allies chose one when Field Marshal Rommel wasn't in France. He was 500 miles away for 2 reasons: Lucy's 50th birthday and a planned confrontation with Hitler about the collapsing military situation. He had the intention to go to Hitler and tell him again what it would mean if Normandy has been fallen. Manfred explained. The early days of June brought very poor weather according to German forecasts, so many officers believed that an invasion was unlikely during that period. Channel weather was terrible. High winds, heavy rain, rough seas. He was very surprised, Manfred said, because German naval experts insisted no landing was possible. Yet Allied meteorologists spotted a brief weather window. Eisenhower made what seemed a risky decision. He said, "Go." And the location, Normandy, not Killala. Operation Fortitude had worked. German forces stayed concentrated at Killala, waiting for an invasion that never came. That morning, thousands of Allied aircraft and ships approached Normandy. The German response was confusion. The Luftwaffe considered weather unflyable. The Navy had almost no presence. Infantry units were the first to report the invasion. In Herlingen, Rommel received the call from his chief of staff. Even then, doubts remained. Was this the real invasion, or a diversion meant to draw troops from Killala? Manfred was home on leave from flak helper duties. He watched his father react with frustration and anger. He said, "I wish I was in France." Headquarters still lacked a clear picture, but within an hour, Rommel ordered his driver to prepare for departure. Rommel left Herlingen late in the morning and reached his headquarters at La Roche-Guyon late that evening, by which time the Allies had already secured a firm foothold on the beaches 12 hours after the battle began. By then, the Allies had suffered heavy losses but secured their foothold. Thousands of troops were ashore and pushing inland. Everything Rommel predicted was now reality. Allied air superiority was overwhelming. Roads and tanks were struck repeatedly from above. Allied ships controlled the channel, their guns firing deep inland. On June 7th, Rommel went to Normandy to assess the situation, then returned to headquarters. His conclusion was devastating. The Allies were firmly established and nothing could push them back. Operation Fortitude kept working. Germany's 15th Army waited at Kalala for weeks, expecting the real invasion. By the time they realized the deception, it was too late. A week after D-Day, Rommel knew the war in Western Europe was lost. My father was convinced that the Germans had never had any chance to win the battle under the beaches. Manfred said on June 17th, Rommel met Hitler at the Marvel headquarters and warned him that the situation in Normandy was already slipping beyond recovery. On June 17, 1944, Hitler met Field Marshals Rommel and von Rundstedt at his forward headquarters in France, and the discussion became a clash between Rommel's realistic view of Normandy and Hitler's refusal to accept bad news. Rommel described the situation in Normandy by saying that the Allies now held a firm beachhead, and he warned that more Allied troops and supplies arrived every day while German units could hardly move in daylight without being attacked from the air. So he argued that Germany had to seek political terms soon or risk a complete disaster in the West. My father even did not exclude that Hitler might give in when he sees that there is no hope. Manfred recalled his father's thinking. "We cannot win the war and this is not possible. We must see that." Hitler listened. Then he allegedly said something that revealed Germany's true horror. "I see it well. But with me, nobody will make peace." Let that sink in. Hitler reportedly acknowledged Germany was losing, understood the war was hopeless, but also knew the Allies wouldn't negotiate with him personally, and rather than step aside, he was prepared to drag the entire nation down. Many people had to discover that Hitler would more like to lead the Germans to the disaster, Manfred remembered. And this is terrifying that he was almost successful. According to accounts, Rommel pushed harder. If the Allies wouldn't negotiate with Hitler, then Hitler should step down. It was the only way to save Germany. Rommel told Hitler to make peace, even if that meant that Hitler had to step down as head of state. Scholars noted the proper considerations have to be taken. For a German general to suggest this bordered on treason, but Rommel had reached a point where silence was impossible. Hitler refused. He wouldn't step down, wouldn't seek peace, would fight until the end. Through June and into July, Normandy deteriorated exactly as Rommel predicted. The Allies expanded their beachhead while German forces fought bravely, but couldn't stop the advance. Meanwhile, whispers spread of a plot to assassinate Hitler. When conspirators allegedly approached Rommel, they found a willing listener, but not a willing participant. Many historians agree that Rommel was willing to see Hitler arrested and removed, but that he was at first against assassination. And they say he felt that killing a head of state was both illegal and dangerous for Germany, although some modern scholars think his views may have become more radical as the war went on. The great majority were passive. Manfred explained about resistance. It was not possible to tell to your friend, "We should kill Hitler and make a revolution." Maybe the friend is such a patriot that he runs to the police, denounces you. Some evidence suggests Rommel may have been working on his own plan, not killing Hitler, but perhaps negotiating with the Allies himself if Hitler refused to surrender. On July 15th, Rommel wrote a 3-page letter to Hitler, his final attempt to make the Führer see reason. The letter reportedly laid out the military situation clearly. The war in the West was lost. Germany should seek peace immediately. The only thing that Erwin Rommel could have done, he could have done no other. Historians reflected. He could not have remained silent and watched the Germany that he loved be destroyed in the name of a man that he had come to detest. 2 days later, Rommel's career ended, but not by Hitler's hand, at least not directly. July 17, 1944. Rommel's staff car rolled along a narrow Normandy road. He had been attending a conference with commanders about the deteriorating situation. Now he was returning to Larosquang. Then someone saw the flash of wings above as Allied fighter bombers dived toward the road, and later accounts suggest they were probably British or Canadian Spitfires, even though the exact pilots are still debated by historians. The car was forced off the road and into the ditch. The report stated, in the process, Rommel, who was sitting in the front seat, was thrown against the frame of the windshield, smashed to the left side of his face to the point where it was almost disfiguring. Machine gun fire had raided the car, forcing the driver to lose control. Rommel was hurled forward, his face slamming into metal. They rushed him to a hospital. Manfred came immediately, fearing the worst. I first supposed that he would die on the same night. He remembered his cheekbone was crushed. The orbit for his left eye received a fractured skull. Somehow Rommel survived. My father dead, Manfred said, and this was the end of his military career. The damage was extensive. Left side of face shattered, one eye socket fractured, skull cracked. The damage to Rommel's head and face was severe and left him in pain. But witnesses later said that he remained mentally clear and alert even though the injuries forced him to leave the front and ended his active command. Rommel would never command troops again. He was relieved for medical reasons and sent home to Herlingen to recover. Some witnesses later claimed that Rommel was thinking about using his position in the West to open peace talks with the Allies if Hitler refused to act, and several historians believe he was moving in that direction. But there is no clear proof that a concrete surrender plan was already in place when he was wounded on July 17th. If such plans existed, they died on that French road. 3 days later, on July 20th, the plot to assassinate Hitler came to its violent climax at Hitler's Wolfslair headquarters. A bomb exploded in the conference room. Several died, but Hitler emerged wounded, but alive. His rage was terrible. More than 5,000 people would be killed in Hitler's purge, most with no connection to the plot. The trials were show trials before the People's Court, where outcomes were predetermined. He didn't leave the People's Court with an acquit. Those who studied the trials noted it was only a question of how much of a circus and how much of a farce they would make out of the proceedings before a pronouncement of guilt and a death sentence was handed down. On Hitler's suspect list, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Rommel was guilty of speaking the truth to Hitler. Historians concluded it didn't matter if he was in on the plot to kill Hitler or not. Rommel committed treason in Hitler's eyes for having a defaced attitude. Evidence against Rommel was circumstantial. Some conspirators had mentioned his name, but there was no proof he actively participated in assassination planning. Facts didn't matter. Hitler wanted Rommel eliminated. Through late summer and autumn 1944, Rommel recovered at home, grateful to be alive, unaware that Hitler had already decided his fate. On October 14th, death came calling. When Erwin Rommel woke on October 14th, 1944, he did not know it was his last day. He ate breakfast with Lucy and Manfred, still recovering from his injuries, but grateful to be home. Around noon, a Mercedes staff car arrived. 2 SS generals, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Massel, asked to speak with him privately. What followed later emerged from fragments of testimony. They told Rommel that he was now suspected of acting against the Führer and that Hitler and the army leadership in Berlin had already decided his fate and would force him to choose between suicide and a show trial in the People's Court. Hitler offered a choice. One general carried cyanide. If Rommel took it, he would die quickly. His family would be safe, and he would receive a state funeral without disgrace. The other option was facing the People's Court, certain humiliation, a guilty verdict, and a hanging with no promise of safety for Lucy and Manfred. Rommel had 15 minutes. He spoke briefly with Lucy. In a quarter of an hour, "I'll be dead," he reportedly said. Then he found Manfred and told him to be strong and protect his mother. Rommel stepped into the Mercedes with the generals. The car drove only a short distance and stopped. The driver and General Massel walked away from the car, and Burgdorf stayed inside with Rommel for the last few minutes. The driver and General Massel walked away from the car, and Burgdorf stayed inside with Rommel for the last few minutes. The poison acted fast. Within minutes, he was gone. On October 18th, Germany mourned him publicly. The official story claimed he died from earlier injuries. At the funeral, Field Marshal von Rundstedt read a speech written by Goebbels' ministry saying, "Rommel's heart belonged to the Führer." A statement that was, in truth, nonsense. Lucy and Manfred accepted condolences in silence, knowing the truth would endanger their lives. Rommel had warned Hitler repeatedly that the war was lost, and continuing would only destroy Germany. 7 more months of fighting followed, costing countless lives and leaving the nation in ruins before Hitler finally killed himself on April 30th, 1945. History later recorded that Rommel had been right all along and had paid for his honesty with his life. The story of Erwin Rommel and Adolf Hitler is often framed as betrayal, but that misunderstands what really happened. Rommel didn't betray Hitler through conspiracy or assassination plots. His betrayal was simpler and more profound. Erwin Rommel told the truth. In a regime built on lies, where questioning the Führer was treason, Rommel committed the ultimate crime. He assessed Germany's military situation honestly and spoke plainly about what he saw. North Africa was lost. He said so. The Atlantic Wall was inadequate. He said so. D-Day meant the West was lost. He said so. Hitler needed to seek peace. He said that too. Every assessment proved correct. Every warning came true. Rommel wasn't spreading false gloom. He was giving honest professional military opinion. But in Hitler's Germany, honesty had become indistinguishable from treason. Rommel's transformation took years. There was no single moment of sudden realization. Understanding came gradually. First, the military reality that Germany couldn't win a two-front war, that Hitler's decisions were increasingly divorced from battlefield facts. Then came the moral shock as reports and rumors about concentration camps, mass killings, and the regime's systematic crimes slowly became clear to him. What he learned and slowly understood about these crimes changed something very deep inside Rommel. My father discovered not only a lot of crimes which had been committed, Manfred said, but also that this will be a tremendous dilemma, and it will be impossible to come to a reasonable peace arrangement. By 1944, Rommel was increasingly aware that he had been serving a leader who was ready to sacrifice the country for his own illusions. That knowledge must have been devastating, realizing your loyalty, service, and military genius had been used for evil. Some generals never made that reckoning. They served Hitler until the end, claiming they were just following orders. They chose obedience's comfort over moral judgment's difficulty. Rommel made a different choice. Late, perhaps too late to matter much, he chose to speak truth. He risked everything, position, reputation, life, to try saving Germany from total destruction. There's something both admirable and tragic in Rommel's final year. Admirable because he found courage to speak when silence was safer. Tragic because he had been blind so long, because his awakening came too late to change outcomes. But he did speak. That matters. In a system designed to crush dissent, where truth could mean death, Rommel chose honesty over safety. The war was no longer about Germany. Observers noted the war had morphed into being about Adolf Hitler. Hitler was no longer working for Germany's general good. He was using Germany to preserve himself. This was the real betrayal. Not Rommel's honesty, but Hitler's selfishness. The Führer preferred seeing Germany destroyed rather than admitting defeat, preferred millions more dying to surrendering power. When his most celebrated general pointed this out, Hitler had him killed. The method reveals everything about the Nazi regime's final days. Hitler couldn't afford Rommel's public trial. The field marshal was too popular, his record too impressive. A trial would give Rommel a platform to speak about why Germany lost, about Hitler's strategic failures. So Hitler offered the cyanide vial and state funeral promise. Rommel took the poison to protect his family. He died to save Lucy and Manfred from Gestapo revenge. The state funeral that followed was propaganda. Von Runad's speech about Rommel's heart belonging to Hitler was a lie, and everyone at high levels knew it. But maintaining fiction was important. Germany needed to believe all heroes supported Hitler. 7 months later, with Soviet soldiers in Berlin streets, Hitler finally recognized what Rommel had been saying since 1943. The war was lost. But instead of surrendering to save what remained, Hitler took his own life and left Germany to face consequences of his catastrophic decisions. The broader lesson extends beyond one general and one dictator. It's about what happens when military professionalism confronts political fanaticism, about systems that punish honesty and reward obedience regardless of consequences, about the officer's eternal dilemma. When does serving your country require disobeying the leader who claims to embody it? Rommel struggled with these questions. His answer came late, but it came. He chose truth over loyalty to Hitler, chose Germany over the Führer. He paid the ultimate price. As autumn leaves fell around Hurlingen on October 14, 1944, as a black Mercedes carried a condemned general to death, one thing became clear. In Nazi Germany, the greatest crime wasn't treason against the state. It was speaking truth to power, looking at reality honestly, and refusing to pretend delusion was wisdom. Van Rommel betrayed Hitler by being honest. For that honesty, for refusing to participate in comfortable fiction that Germany could still win, for insisting on speaking plainly about military facts, he was murdered by the regime he had served. History vindicated every word he spoke. Every warning proved accurate. The Desert Fox saw the future clearly while Hitler lived in fantasy. But vindication came too late. The cyanide vial, the quiet death on a country road, the state funeral built on lies. This was how Nazi Germany treated one of its greatest generals when he dared tell Rommel's final battle wasn't fought with tanks. It was fought with words, with reports, with letters begging Hitler for reason. He lost that battle. But in losing, he preserved something important: his integrity, his refusal to participate in the lie consuming Germany. The Desert Fox died not as a traitor, but as one of the few German generals willing to speak plainly about reality. In Hitler's Germany, that made him dangerous. In history's judgment, it makes him tragic. A professional soldier who woke too late to the regime's nature, but found courage to speak truth when that truth could cost everything. And it did cost everything. But in those final months of 1944, RML faced death knowing he had tried to save his country from a madman's delusions. Hitler killed him for it, but the truth RML spoke outlived them both. If you found this story of courage in the face of tyranny compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from history. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the past. We explore the human stories behind the history books, the moments when ordinary people faced extraordinary choices, when truth collided with power, and when speaking up meant risking everything. Join us next time as we uncover another chapter from history that deserves to be remembered.